All right. So glad we've got a good panel here today on the buy side to bring the buy side perspective. I'm going to just to ask each of the panelists just to state the name and the company and the role of that company. So we can kick off and then we'll get into the questions. So John, why don't you start?
Sure. Jon Mansell, I work at MAGNA Global, responsible for thinking about how our holding company investment strategy changes as we infuse data and technology into that.
I'm Jack Smith. I'm Chief Product Officer at GroupM. We buy 1/3 of the world's media. We have about 30,000 people globally, part of WPP Group. And I make things, I fix things that are broken. Also work with corporate development on investing in companies. Oh, you've got one.
Hi, I'm Trace Rutland. Trace Rutland with Tyson Foods, and we are more than just a chicken company. We actually are chicken, beef, and pork. Anyway, we're based out of Chicago. I lead media innovation and digital engagement. The most important part of that being the media innovations piece of it. I'm looking for new and better ways to talk to consumers.
Krakauer over at Amplify within Dentsu Aegis. I'm the director of audience intelligence there. That means anything data or ad tech, emerging technology I want to get my hands on. So right now, over the last year and a half, I've been working a lot on Merkle and the acquisition in M1. So I've gone from Merkle to Merkle trees.
Good segue there. So just want to take a bit of a lay of the land from each of you, just to get a sense for kind of what your efforts are around blockchain, what you're hearing, kind of any company efforts you've got, anything you're hearing from your clients, just to get, and obviously with yourself directly from the activity you might have, not just in this industry, but with blockchains in general. Can you give us a sense for that as we start the conversation?
So within IPG, we do have a blockchain council. There are a lot of different brands at IPG. We have your traditional media agencies like and Initiative. You have Cadreon, which is a programmatic trading team. You have Magna, which is an media investment strategy, as well as Reprise, which is traditionally handled search, social, and things like that. So there are a lot of different units. We've coalesced a quorum of people who really are passionate about the subject and how it can apply to our business. We're currently meeting every couple weeks. We've developed internal POVs. We've spent quite a bit of time trying to centralize intelligence on all of the partners in the space and map that out. And we're eager to test wherever we can. And I think you'll hear a lot from me about how to think about the actual workflow, less than just what can we do, as how do we make that available and easy to use for the traditional workflow within an agency or an in-house team.
At GroupM, we also have a global work group. Mike Palmer, who co-chairs the IAB blockchain group, is part of that. We meet weekly. We've done similar things where we've tried to centralize that information, although it's quite challenging when you're looking at 80+ markets and a seemingly endless number of companies coming in who put now with 100% more blockchain on their deck. So we a lot of what we've done at first is trying to just understand and contextualize blockchain, what it could mean for the business, then where do we think it's going to bring value, how much of value is it going to bring. We're trying to always quantify that, and then also we run tests and enable the agencies to run their own tests.
Okay, thank you.
So right now we're working. Well, actually, we're doing several blockchain initiatives. We have one media blockchain initiative that we're running a test with MAGNA, and we are working on another one that we're going to do in conjunction with GroupM. We also, outside of our media space, in our supply chain piece of it, are working with blockchain, one through Walmart and then one without Walmart for supply chain transparency on that side. We have a strong interest in it. I mean, I say we, it's mostly me right now, but I'm trying to get people more excited about it internally for the promise of it for a lot of reasons, not just because digital supply chain is a huge issue for us, and then what is the next potential of blockchain from an enterprise standpoint? I think there's a lot more there. So it's something that I'm pretty passionate about internally. I talk to the agency quite a bit about it. Sometimes I think they wish I would stop talking so much about it, but I think it's really it's not all of my job, but it's certainly an important piece.
Yeah, I appreciate how you mentioned that, as some days it feels like it's just you, and I think there'll probably be some nodding heads over here. You know, blockchain doesn't quite yet pay the bills, so a lot of us are probably spending some of our, additional efforts to try to really get in front of the sector. So at Dentsu, we've stood up a blockchain council. It's within our innovation group, very similar to some of the things you guys have heard just now. We're going to be filtering opportunities, education, and really just general exploration of blockchain opportunities throughout that group as a hub.
Cool, it's good. I mean, something I was hearing a lot of preparation, a lot of exploring, but have you actually run a campaign? Has anyone running a campaign yet? Yeah. So it's gone beyond education, gone beyond kind of collaborative in the early stages. You're running campaigns, right? So and that's the last 3 months kind of thing, or before? What's the kind of timescales we're talking about?
It's been concentrated really in the last 3 months. Although I will say that the education effort for us, because we are 30,000 people, most of those people are non-technical. It's an ongoing challenge, and it's going to be probably for the next 2 years.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, with any new technology, there's a lot of education, there's a lot of moving parts. But so it's good to hear that there's been at least a campaign run. But what were the kind of requirements? How did you get to that point? What was required from communication with clients, communications internally, to get to that point where the budget was approved to be spent and actually do something?
Yeah, we've run a handful of campaigns as well, and similar to Jack, I have recognized more activity in the market in the last couple of months, so it's really encouraging momentum. I think one of the challenges is needing a framework to understand and evaluate some of these opportunities through. Obviously, everything is new, and when we are evaluating partners or use cases, are we using old models to evaluate? Does this require a new model? And so that's kind of where we're at right now, is kind of taking a step back and thinking, okay, how can we, knowing that this is a rapidly developing part of the industry, how can we become part of that process without essentially stagnating part of it?
Sorry, do you want to?
I was just saying, we have a couple of campaigns that we've run. We're still in the process. We haven't really seen results yet, but they're definitely in play. And I think we started out with display, and then we added video. I think we're still working inside of the PMP environment. So
I'm gonna say that we really we've spent a lot of time talking about what a test would look like, but right now I'm not really sure that anything that's been presented to us quite yet fits into the workflow of the team. So have we spoken in depth about the value proposition? Yes. So far, no one has come in and said our value proposition, yes, you still need to write us an IO. Yes, you're gonna send us ad tags, but then after that, it's gonna be totally blockchain. And it's just not jiving with the way that it just appears to be either it's a managed service offering or it's a form of verification. And I think that Kyle said it very well in the sense that proving the value prop is not yet crystal clear, because I think a lot of clients well, there's a bridge that needs to be made between the technology and the why, and proving the value that has to the client is not really materializing quite yet. Although again, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think there was a lot of hope.
So I think it's important. You're focused in on the workflow part heavily, right? So I'd just like to hear from you all, particularly what problems we're aspiring to solve. Obviously, the workflow Jon's been quite clear about, but are there particular other areas that have been honed in, particularly from your clients or from yourselves, that you are focused on 100%, or is it too? I know it's difficult because you have so many diverse different businesses that you're supporting, right? But is there one particular area around fraud, transparency, payments, reconciliation data where you really think it's going to kind of coalesce in the very early stages and maybe different in the future?
I mean, my thinking is that reconciliation and smart contracts is the biggest opportunity at this point. I think that even in programmatic, you have multiple platforms, you have multiple invoices coming in, you have the introduction of viewability and non-human traffic, that supply side reconciliation. I think domain verification from spoofing is still, it's certainly getting better, but there's a lot to be done there, and I think that's the biggest opportunity to illustrate things in a single dashboard to a client to say, we as a digital agency might have eroded your trust in the past. All of the holding companies are guilty, but now here is all of the fees from the supply side all the way to your initial budget. Here's all the verification that went into it, and I think that's where the biggest opportunity lies for me.
So, yes, I mean I agree with everything you said. I think the piece of it that's not to be overlooked, the verification piece, sure, and the trying to unroot fraud that will maybe always be with us. I don't know. Is the on the reconciliation time, the billing piece of that. That's so huge for a public company, in being able to get billing in a timely manner. There's so much lag time now between when a campaign runs and when we receive the billing, and all the time in between there. It's a huge problem for us not being able to have actualized numbers on a monthly basis. We all deal with it, but nobody likes it. We're constantly explaining it to our internal finance departments. Just fixing that piece of it, getting actualized billing, would be a huge win for everybody. The fraud piece and the transparency piece obviously are huge too. I mean, we're talking about what the use cases are for it. I think there's a lot of use cases, but I think the two biggest ones are just those. I mean, if we can just get one or both of those, it would change so much about how we do business and how happy we are about what we do.
I think because we have so much data that we collect directly or collect on behalf of clients, making sure that we're doing it in a privacy compliant way across a bunch of different markets, which is quite difficult to do. If we're able to do that in a distributed way, similar to the changes that we made maybe almost 10 years ago when we started putting technology like Hadoop in, that could be a more fundamental use case long-term for the business, because if you have a notion of profile can change at that point, and the usability of that data becomes a lot easier. That also forces some of the walled gardens to play a little bit differently if others that are not the big 3 or 4, or in the case of China, the big 3 in China, further down the list in terms of spend. I think that changes the relationship that they can have with brands. So I think that for us we think it's probably the biggest deal long term.
Yeah, so that's we've heard a couple of things on the last few comments. One was finances, which I'd like to get to in a minute. But the first thing I'm hearing just from Jack here is that there seems to be there's efforts going on to solve some of these problems independent of blockchain, right?
Absolutely.
And actually, that's a lot around for us at least, and the way we look at it. Michael, Shelley, and the members of the group, right, the blockchain working group. Standards, best practices, methods. How, as you look at what's going on at the moment, right, in the previous OpenRTB, other specs that are existing, right? How do you look at those two, those two activities? We have the OpenRTB and we have work that's going on inside blockchain, right? Like we can't have two of the efforts going on at once, right? How do you look at that? And how do you apply effort to those things?
It's a really good question. I think there is a lot of ads.txt, ads.cert is an industry effort that seems like it's accomplishing a lot of the things that have also been spoken about. You have, I think that the OpenID Consortium, also now an IAB initiative. These are coming from different angles, right? I think the OpenID Consortium was coming from really the consequence of the commoditization of the RTB space in many ways. We're looking to reduce costs, and so simplifying the protocol is where the interest lies there. But at the same time, there's applications into a lot of the user identification from the consumer standpoint and how that can pair together. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I'm not sure that there's enough communication going on between the crew and this crew and the crew that probably comes in 3 days later and talks about the OpenID Consortium. It probably needs to be more of a mesh there. And the IB can probably help lead that.
Yeah, there's a lot of what we talk about. So just to be clear that it's from our perspective, it's an important point. The one thing I will, put my IAB co-chair hat on and say that the governance layer that's built that's designed inside this consensus system and its distributed nature of it, very much needs to be worked out and lends itself very nicely to making that collaboration properly under right rules with the right governance. And that's something that I don't know if we're going to solve that today. In fact, I know we won't solve that today, but
we're not leaving until we solve it.
We'll just lock the doors. It's raining outside anyway, so we're all staying here. We've got enough alcohol, at least for this evening. But I want to give the rest of the panelists a chance to respond to that or give your opinion on that one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Governance and standardization across the industry is going to be super important, and I think we all have to be a little self-reflective and understand that we've been coming off the heels of a little bit of a lack of trust by what we can do with technology and what can be some of the pitfalls of technology. And I think people are going to be looking to folks like the IAB or some other outlet to really kind of make not just us as buyers, but also our clients and our partners comfortable with within the space. And then just on top of that, I think the solutions that are probably going to precede the efficiency plays will be, the effectiveness plays will be the efficiency plays. Somebody had mentioned it earlier today, that when you get caught up a little bit in the nuances, you don't always need to go down that deep into the technology when we're talking core concepts and we're talking efficiency plays. So if we can recognize revenue or affect the bottom line, that's a much easier conversation to get the ball rolling.
I mean, we have conversations with clients every day who say, I think I'm paying too much ad tax. So dollars moving from working media into other stuff. The first company who comes in and is able to quantify how much they're going to save by using blockchain is going to have a huge advantage, because we typically don't see companies coming in talking about total cost of ownership, how it's going to offset some of that ad tax, and it's going to solve this problem. And if you can knock those three things out, then you have a massive advantage.
I hope the ad tech companies are taking notes. I want to come back to the finance part mentioned earlier, because I think that's actually it's fairly close to my heart as president of NYIAX and having the relationship we have with NASDAQ. But this question: how does your finance team react if you ask them to buy Bitcoin for a campaign? Like, how does that conversation go right now internally within the agency or within the advertiser?
I don't know, and I don't look forward to it.
You haven't asked that question, Jon?
No, I have not. But I would defer to the client. What do you think of buying some Bitcoin for your campaigns?
I think that I would not be the person that would have that conversation with our finance team. I don't think right now it would go over very well. I think maybe I don't see it, and I've heard it discussed before. Getting to that point, I don't think it's a bad idea. I just think it's not timing is not right for that right now. And I think it depends on the company too. I don't think our company would be the right company to test that one. I think it'd probably be something a little different business model.
Yeah, I think it's a bit early. For those who were here for most of the day, I think it's quite clear that there's a separation between the cryptocurrency aspect of this today and the underlying use of the technology. So I do agree. But let's be less jovial about it. On the finance side, right, of your businesses, what is the conversation like, right? Are they educating as well in this process now? Is it still too early? How's that conversation going generally? Not the Bitcoin one, the blockchain one.
Well, I would say that the conversations are happening for sure. I want to affirm that there is quite a lot of interest, and rightfully so. I think everybody is keen to restore trust in digital. Because I do think mistakes were made that are just being cleaned up now, and leaning into this technology from a transparency and reconciliation standpoint is a way to prove that your business is as transparent as you say that it is. And I think inevitably the push all the way down where you see the entire ad tech tax and the impact that has on your campaigns is actually very helpful for the holding companies in proving the value that they create. Because once all of that supply chain gets cleaned up and transparent, then it gets back into, well, what's the value prop of a holding company in negotiating the lowest tech fee possible and the greatest access possible? And you kind of get the pendulum swings back into the value prop that holding companies have to leverage their heft in the marketplace. So I know that kind of went off a little bit, but I'm very excited about it, and we're having a lot of conversation with the clients in that regard.
Yeah, in some respects right now, blockchain technology is a solution in search of the best use cases. And that's not a bad thing. It's actually a great opportunity for us as an industry.
On the finance side, I'd love to hear from the rest of the guys on the finance
well,
side.
as working for a company who was started by an accountant, I can tell you that it's a pretty difficult conversation to have with finance when you've just had to explain to them why blockchain and Bitcoin aren't the same thing, and now you have to go back and say, okay, now you got to buy Bitcoin to execute this campaign. So that's pretty challenging. I think what they're going to worry about the same things they always worry about: exposure, how to get insurance on that exposure. Compliance is a huge deal for all the processes that we do. They have to be compliant with the government. They also have to be compliant with our client contracts. And until we get sign-off from compliance saying yes, they are, then it becomes very difficult for us to scale any kind of new process in there, because we've had lawyers look at those processes and bless them, and consultancies and a bunch of folks look at those processes and say yes, those work. I think where the opportunity is initially on just process work is probably more focused on us internally within WPP. So we've had discussions internally about how we would test this internally to actually get compliance sign-off without going outside and getting any increased exposure or risk.
So, we at NYIAX, we heavily focused on replicating essentially the financial rigor that comes from the NASDAQ exchange, right? And that was, a big education for me as somebody who's been in advertising and technology for close to 20 years and had seen some of the, frankly, bullshit that happens, right? That's just the way it grew up, because it was a very innovative space and there wasn't regulation and there. So it was interesting for me, and I think actually it's nice to hear that companies are focused on the compliance aspect. I think that's important. Building. So as you the other component of that that's different from, especially from the capital markets, which is where we come from, is we have this data asset, right, which is really what's being traded in the industry, right? So that's really where we've got to now. We're really trading data. I mean, obviously, it needs to be the consumer's consent data, and so let's not go to GDPR right now, but that needs to be there. So as far as sharing data, the application and using blockchain for that, is that a conversation? I mean, you mentioned a little bit, Jack, kind of earlier on that, but I want to hear from the rest, because we certainly see that's the future for trading, and actually, what we see from the capital markets is more and more and more data is integral. It's not just the simple like you or I just trading. That's at the core of high frequency trading. It's at the core of a lot of scaled markets, really scaled markets. Ones that are more than $1 trillion. So I'd love to hear you talk about data and its role and how you're thinking about it here. Beyond what you said, Jack. Maybe if other panelists want to contribute, then please feel free.
Yeah, data, audience, privacy, these things are all kind of converging together. And where for the last couple of years, it's led to some really exciting opportunities in terms of leveraging data and being able to reach addressable audiences in a more fidelitous way. As we continue to reach our intended audiences, we start seeing some of the privacy concerns, and I think some of the external factors don't help. And so we see obviously a number of us have made large bets within audience data, and we look at blockchain as a potential solution to ward off some of the challenges that we kind of anticipate coming, and even some that we don't anticipate coming. So when we're looking at digital identity management, and some folks were here today who showed some great solutions for that, that's where the puck is going.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that inevitably it leads to a scenario where you actually have an opt-in with a consumer direct, where a brand can comfortably have a direct-to-consumer conversation, and it's not strange. You don't feel like you're being traced or tracked or followed around the internet, but that it's something that the consumer knows why it's happening, that they opted into it, and that they're actually excited about that engagement. So I think a lot of the things that were said today are more realistic now that we have various ways for consumers to feel safe about how that interaction occurs.
I think I agree really with everything that's been said, but I think the thing that we don't talk about, well, data and audience is very important, but there are other uses for it. I mean, I just like to have universal frequency capping, which we still don't have, right? If we could just have that'd justify the cost of it, right? So you start with that, and then you can go into other uses that are beyond audience. Even really great geo-targeting would be something nice. We really don't have that. Everybody says they do, but then when you start digging in, you find out it's really not as good as everybody talked about. And a lot of companies, like Tyson, as we introduce new products, and we're only doing it in 1 or 2 markets, sometimes we're not even doing it in an entire market, but only in a few zip codes. To be able to really do that. And I think what I don't want to get lost, because it seemed today not to be talked about, is finding one type of solution that applies to data, and it applies to billing, and it applies to fraud, as opposed to having 2,000 tech companies that I mean, it's a hard conversation to have internally, even with like a YouTube example, where you need to use open slate to make sure that for brand safety. So it's like every time you turn around, everything you use, you've got to have 3 more layers to it. If blockchain could help us, frequency cap and pay people, handle reconciliation faster. I mean, if it could help with all of those things, all of that does is reduce costs, which is what we're always looking for. And I think we can't talk too much about how much things cost, not just from a tax way, but from the money that we waste in terms of too much frequency, not enough reach, or targeting in the wrong zip code when we only have one store in a market.
Okay. Jack, you look like you were preparing to say something there. So
No.
No, just got your. Yeah, just. Shelley, I just want a quick question on timing. I know we've. Yeah, so I think open it up to questions from anyone in the audience.
This question is for Tracy. With all these vendors that have come together and just talking about how it's difficult to layer a lot of the different partners together, where do you see these recommendations coming from? Should it start internally with the brand, or should the agency be responsible to make these recommendations for identity?
Definitely from the agency. I mean, that's what we pay them for, right? For those kinds of things. And if you think about from a brand, so my job is very focused in this space, but if you think about, when you talk about the brand, you talk about the entire brand landscape, like brand marketers. I mean, they're basically running a business, and this is a small part of a bigger job they have. So I don't think it makes sense to live there, but yeah, I mean, that's what we want from our agency.
I would say that it's even more than the client needs to be on board, the agency, and then the publishers. A very large coalition of publishers, because what I've found is that an agency voice, even one as large as IPG or WPP, it's not maybe even enough to get somebody to deploy. At this point, with what we've seen in the ad tech consolidation space, the roadmaps are not very easily changed. They're not very flexible, and teams are not super excited about changing them to accommodate what they consider a fringe technology. I think the biggest problem with ad tech companies is that they don't see beyond themselves. So they're like, we're transparent, we're in compliance, and you're like, but in order for me to prove that, I need to show you as a part of the whole. And that usually triggers something, but it's not enough to move a product roadmap. So when publishers and buyers kind of squeeze the middle, that's when I see the most movement.
One more. Exactly. Oh, you were going to ask the question? Yeah. Anyone else before we thank the panel and get to the last session? All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and